line through it?
Anyway, so welcome everybody. We're going to get started with this, and welcome to the. Is it correct? You know, the last time I did this, the date was wrong on here, and I just read it. So just today, actually March 15th. Anyway, welcome to the March 15th meeting of OCAPA, and I'm Sam Smith. I'm the treasurer. I'm filling in for the president, vice president, and so let's see how I do with this. This is not a training. I'm not going to take the nomination. All right. Let's see.
Space bar.
Space bar. Is that the space bar?
Big long, there you go.
Please silence your iPads and your other things. All right, Tom.
Introductions.
Oh. Okay, introductions. We'll start with Tom.
You're
Tom,
not doing
WA9AFM.
Bill, N5 Inc. UK.
You're not doing very well. Dwayne, AA5KD.
Sam, introduce yourself.
Sam, KI5 SAM.
Kiss
Solution.
K85 LPD.
Steve, November Echo 5 Sierra Delta.
Will.
KJ5 Golf Whiskey November.
Rich WB5 YB7.
Paul KI5 KLM.
Jim K5 JRR.
Rick N5BYF.
Henry N5IH.
Dave WD5G.
Noah, KJ5DNX.
Hoy N5OK.
Jim N50HL.
I'm going to go over here.
Okay, I'm with Bill.
Bill K5QXB.
And last but not least, that's the reason I did it.
Terry,
Terry,
W5TJS.
who wears his name tag upside
No,
down
it's
in case,
not.
in case he forgets who he is. All right.
Which is quite
Now,
awful.
the HOA bill, and this is a hot item. I've had a lot of questions about this, so I'm anxious to hear what Tom has to say.
Thank you. You've heard a lot about the HOA bill. It's been reintroduced in Congress. We're going to get into some of the history of previous HOA or similarly situated legislation and rulemaking as we go through today. But what we're going to try to do is answer some questions not only about the history of some of these HOA proposals, but also answer some questions about the legislation that's been just recently reintroduced. The official name of this new legislation is the Amateur Radio Emergency Preparedness Act, and that title was very carefully picked so they could emphasize the emergency preparedness aspect of amateur radio and how it could be degraded if we were denied the use of antennas. Now, let's do a bit of history first. The ability for the FCC to put out rulemaking regarding antenna rules, not only for HOAs but government agencies, has been around for about 30 years. Congress gave the FCC permission. They didn't order them. They gave them permission to make rules on that aspect of the hobby. And in some cases, the FCC really drug their feet and didn't do anything until they were really pressured. And what they were authorized to do was put out rules that would prohibit anyone from causing an amateur radio operator not to be able to install an antenna with reasonable restrictions. And the FCC policy has been to require, they've been quite open about having governmental and agencies to not bar amateur radio antennas. That hasn't always been successful, as we'll see in just a moment. The first time the FCC really stepped up and did something about antenna restrictions was what's called PRB, Proposed Rulemaking Bulletin Number 1. PRB 1 was first introduced in 1985, and it protects from unreasonable government agencies, in other words, city, county, state, and federal regulations or bans, and allows receive antennas with some reasonable restrictions. However, PRB 1 did not apply to HOAs or covenants or CCNRs, covenants, conventions, and restrictions. So that's when everything first started, back in 1985, PRB 1. There was a lot of misconception about it at the time. A lot of hams thought, okay, you can't keep me from HOA, you can't keep me from having an antenna. Nope, only the city, state, county, etc. could not introduce rules or procedures or protocols that made it, if not a ban, virtually impossible to install an antenna. A few years later came along what they call over-the-air reception devices, better known as OTARD. That occurred in 1996. This protected three types of receiving antennas. HDTV antenna for local reception. What's the difference? Local reception antennas are typically, the boom length is usually about 1 meter or less. In fact, you'll find HDTV receive antennas that are just a flat planer. It looks like a square you can set on top of your TV or on your wall. A lot of people put those in their attic to protect them from the weather, birds, flying debris, etc. It also protected point-to-point Wi-Fi antennas. Now remember, this was in 1996, and there was still a lot of over-the-air cable service. So that was why the point-to-point Wi-Fi antenna was put in there. And also the direct broadcast satellite antennas that are less than 1 meter in diameter. Those three are protected with reasonable restrictions. And you can go on to the FCC website and look up OTARD, and it gives you examples of how a landlord or an HOA can prohibit antennas, but they're relatively reasonable. It also gives examples of how a person wanting to put those antennas up has the upper hand, but there are also reasonable restrictions on them also. Now, there have been several pieces of legislation that have been introduced over the past for amateur radio antennas being protected from HOA rules. One of the earliest proposals was put out by the ARRL, and we got it into Congress. There was a lot of controversy over it. Some people thought the ARRL had caved to the National HOA organization. They have a national association. Well, the legislation was kind of unclear, so it was pulled at the last minute.